everyone. So it's Monday and it is the last day of November. And I don't know how many of you know this, but November is Indigenous Peoples Month. And in America, that means our Native American heritage is honored in this month. And so I thought, even though we're at the end of it, I didn't want to miss out. So I thought we could talk about some really great Native American authors who write both fiction and nonfiction. There's some poetry, there's some short stories, and there are some novels. So there's kind of something for everyone. And I thought it'd be a great way to celebrate the holiday that's just passed us, Thanksgiving, and the whole month, which is their Heritage Month. So I'm going to try something a little different this week. I'm going to put a book cover up, and then I will tell you about that book. And then I'll probably put them all at the end again, so in case you miss it, but I'll put the book cover up first, and then we'll talk about the book, and then the next book cover, and so on and so forth. So let's get started. Okay, so the first book that we're going to focus on is by Louise Erdrich, as you just saw, and it's called The Roundhouse. So she has written a lot. She is a prolific author. She is from the Chippewa Nation, and she is probably one of the most famous, at this moment anyway, Native American writers. She's very popular, very well-known, very mainstream, and I have talked about her in some book talks before. So the book I wanted to focus on, The Roundhouse, is the second in her Justice trilogy. And the reason I chose it is it was in 2012 the National Book Award winner for fiction. Pardon my look down. I have a mush brain and I have a lot that I want to cover, so I'm just going to glance down at my notes so I don't forget anything. So this book, you can certainly read the whole trilogy, but this book I think can be read as a standalone too. This one, the themes are kind of the idea that vengeance isn't satisfying like one might hope or think it would be. And so it focuses on a 12-year-old boy whose mother suffers a brutal attack, and he is not thrilled with the investigation, the way that it's done or the extent of it. It's unsatisfying to him. And so he decides to team up with a few of his friends, 12-year-old friends, to try and do the investigation himself and find the attacker on his own, since he is not getting satisfaction from the police investigation. So she is a beautiful writer. I think the subject is a gripping piece of fiction. So I think if you're into mysteries and thrillers and whodunits, this could work for you. And it could also work if you're into literary fiction, because she writes beautifully. It did win a bunch of prizes and a bunch of critical acclaim. And then the great news is, if you like it, there's 2 other books in the trilogy. And so you have a whole reading list all ready for you. So Louise Erdrich's The Roundhouse is the first book. Now on to our next one. Okay, so you just saw the cover of the second book, which is a much more recent book. So the book is called Theyre, and it's written by Tommy Orange. So this just came out in 2019, so it's very recent. Our library does own it. All of these books actually are owned by our library or the system, and many of them you can find on Hoopla, as well as in print versions in the catalog. So just if you're looking. So just to look at my notes real quick. So Tommy Orange, this is his debut novel, which you know is a thing of mine. I adore a debut novel. I think that they tend to be the most creative and the most thought out, and have the most love and heart put into them, because the writer is usually unsigned at that point and trying to sell something. But they've had a long time to work on it and really develop it into the best version of itself. So this is his debut novel. He did write magazine articles for Esquire and some other writing before that. But this was his, and it made a huge splash. So he was a finalist for the 2019 Pulitzer Prize with a debut novel, which I think is outstandingly incredible. He lives in California, in Oakland, California now, but he is part of the Cheyenne and Arapaho nations in Oklahoma originally. And so this book it's a little unconventional. It starts with a prologue essay by him about the historical legacy of colonialism. So really hits heavy on those themes that I think are just part of everyday life when you are a Native American in America, which was colonized so early, and the history of the things that have happened to their people. So he has an essay about that he writes in his own voice, and then it segs into a 3-part novel that is told by a really diverse cast of Native American characters. And so there's all different walks of life, all different ages, all different, all genders, all different people that he brings together, this cast of characters to tell this narrative story that he's written. It just got amazing reviews. I think everybody is really excited to see what he does next, as this is just the beginning of his career, which is, intimidating. I would imagine that you have done something so fantastic right at the beginning and now you got to follow it up. So keep an eye out for anything in the future by him, but Theyre by Tommy Orange. And now we'll get on to our next book. So the next book that we're going to discuss is actually a collection of poems, which is not something that I do too often because I don't read a lot of poetry personally. It's probably something I should correct. And I've heard from a number of you, though, that you do love poetry. And so I'm working on a full poetry edition of a book talk. But for right now, we can't have a discussion of Native American Heritage Month without talking about our first ever Native American Poet Laureate of the United States, Joy Harjo. So she was named Poet Laureate in 2019, and she is actually only the second poet laureate to ever serve 3 terms. So she's fantastically well known, I don't think you could have a more talked about current poet, and for good reason. Her list of accolades and awards is as long as your arm. She is just wonderful, and her books get so much critical acclaim. She has a magical way of writing, and so I think this collection is a great place for people to start. I read about it, and it's considered the top of her form. So she is from the Muscogee Nation in Oklahoma, and she has written a lot. All of her poetry is heavily involved with her ancestry and Native American heritage, which is why I wanted to discuss it today. So this book of poetry has been called magical and lyrical and uplifting and engaging. And I think all of those things are things that we could all use right now going into the winter. It's kind of a hard time of year for people. So let's find a little magic where we can, right? And I think the great part about this is it's so culturally involved. She talks about the Trail of Tears, but she also talks about the struggles that we all deal with on a day-to-day basis. So I think it's relatable, but it is also a very teachable volume, something that we could all learn something from, which is the whole point of Native American Heritage Month, is to learn about another culture that has really added to the depth of the American culture and also suffered a great deal at the hands of colonialism. And so I think this is a really interesting take on it. And if you're a poetry reader, maybe this is the book that you want to dive into. Or maybe if you're not a poetry reader, this is the one to start with. So on to our next story. Okay, so our next book is by a Native American author called Kelly Jo Ford, who is part of the Cherokee Nation in Oklahoma. And this is a debut novel, and she describes it as a novel in stories. So there are 3 or 4, I think, stories that she has put together to create a novel, and it's called Crooked Hallelujah. So one of the stories that's part of this novel actually won the Paris Review's Plimpton Prize in 2019, which is a big deal. And she's gotten a lot of attention, and it's a debut. So again, starting off with hopefully a very bright future with a lot of critical acclaim and success initially. So this book, again, focuses on her own heritage. So there is some parts that are inspired by things that have happened to her in life, but it's not autobiographical. It's about 4 generations of Cherokee women who are trying to make their way in really harsh environments in the 1980s. And so there's a lot of mother-daughter themes, and there's a lot to learn culturally about Native American heritage and families. So I think it's just, I haven't gotten to read this one yet, but I'm really excited about it. From everything I read, it just sounds phenomenal. Her husband's a poet also, so it seems to run in the family. They're all writers, and it just seems like a fantastic book by an up-and-coming author to watch. So if you haven't checked out Kelly Jo Ford's Crooked Hallelujah, do it today, I think. Okay, and we'll have one more book before we're done, okay? I'll be right back. Okay, so for our last book for this talk, we're going to talk about Where the Dead Sit Talking by Brandon Hobson. So Brandon is part of the Cherokee Nation of Oklahoma, and he has written a few books and also written for McSweeney's and a bunch of other websites and done articles and things like that. This book particularly was in Kirkus's Best Books of 2018 book list, which I've mentioned Kirkus before. They're among the toughest literary reviews out there. I have read many a pan in Kirkus, so getting their best of is quite a feat. And this book they described as a masterly tale of life and death, hopes and fears, secrets and lies, which Has you from the get-go, right? Like who doesn't want to read that book? It is, from another description, a dark and twisting emotional novel about a Cherokee teenage boy who is in the foster care system. So somebody in yet another review that I read described this as if you could have a plot hybrid of Charles Dickens and George Saunders. Pretty big names to be thrown around there. So all of these things sound to me like that is a book to read and an author to watch. All of these books that I have mentioned here are all available in our library catalog, so you can look them up and request them. Many of them were on Hoopla, so you can get them online if you are an ebook person, and a bunch of them were available in audio if you listen to your books. So any format that you're looking for, we have you covered. So I hope that you've enjoyed this talk about our Native American authors to watch here. There are a million more. This is only a very little taste of the pool of Native American authors. So if you have read these and are looking for some different ones, please let me know, because I'm happy to recommend some of the others that I've located doing the search, because there are just so many. It's an embarrassment of riches that we have for talent in this area. So let me know if there's anything I can do to help you find your next best book. And otherwise, we will be back next week, and it will be December already, which this year has gone alternately hugely slowly and very, very fast at the same time. I can't believe it's already December. So I hope you all had a lovely holiday and that you are ready to get back in and reading. If you want to make an appointment, feel free. If you want to pick up your books curbside, we're still doing that. Anything we can do to help. Okay? We'll see you next week, guys. Thank you.